All right, we got a video from Washington gun law pertaining to the Carmelo Anthony case. I don't know the specifics of this case. I know he just got sentenced, but I've been hearing some back and forth, and this dude said something I liked. He's going to look at the facts of the case, reserve his opinions, and look at it from the perspective of the law. I like that, staying a little bit more objective about things. So let's get into this.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I'm Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, we're going to talk again about the Carmelo Anthony case. It seems to be capturing everyone's attention right now. We are going to do two things different than a lot of other content creators are doing, however. Number one, we are not going to give you our opinion as to the ultimate verdict here because, well, candidly, we're not getting live testimony. We're having to rely on third-person accounts. And secondly, wouldn't you want to wait for all the evidence to come in before you reach that conclusion? So we're not going to be doing that. The other thing we're going to be doing that no one else is doing is we're actually going to just take a look at the law. Yeah, we figured that why don't we take a look at what the jury will be instructed to, because at the end of the day, every trial is the application of an acceptable set of facts to the law, is it not? So today, let's spend a few minutes as we talk about
an acceptable set of facts to the law is a crazy statement because that just means it could be some bullshit. An acceptable set of facts to the law. Like, that's very open-ended. But he's right, though. That is how that shit goes.
what the law will say about the Carmelo Anthony case. Okay, America, we are going to be talking about the case that has captured everybody's attention this last week or so, and that, of course, is State of Texas v. Carmelo Anthony. The count is murder. The claim is self-defense. We are going to talk about three very important laws in which a jury will absolutely positively be instructed on at the end of this case. They are all found in Section 9 of the Texas Penal Code. We're going to be talking about Section 9.31. That is just the use of force in general. When can you use any kind of force in defense of yourself or others? The second one is going to be Section 9.32, which is the use of lethal force. And when is that justifiable in Texas? And of course, we do need to talk about lethal force because the force used was plunging a knife into another person's chest. So I don't care what state you're in, that constitutes lethal force. And then the third thing we're going to have to do is take a look at Texas law on provocation. In many other jurisdictions, it's actually called the first aggressor standard, but we're going to have to go over that.
Right. So from what I do understand so far, is that, as he said in the beginning of this video, the claim was self-defense. So I guess Carmelo Anthony was about to be jumped by a group of dudes, and then he pulled out a knife and stabbed the guy in the chest. Like I said, I don't know the specifics. That's just what I've been told from certain sources
as well, because that's going to be a big component of this case as well. Okay, in Section 9.31 of the Texas Penal Code, the ability to use any force, and I'm just talking about any force in general, only exists in Texas in the following situations. Except as provided in subsection B, a person is justified in using force against another when and to the degree the actor reasonably believes the force is immediately necessary to protect the actor against the other's use or attempted use of unlawful force. Okay, and I want you to...
Which would certainly constitute if he were being jumped.
Remember that except as provided for in subsection B, because we're going to circle back on that. But in general, and this is not unique to Texas, this is just about every state operates this way, is we only get to use force in defense of ourselves, others, or property, so long as the force we use was 1, necessary, 2, reasonable, both subjectively and objectively, and finally, proportional. And it is this last element here that can be a very difficult hurdle for the Anthony defense team to overcome. Because if in fact the force we use has to be proportional to the force we're trying to repel, then typically we don't get to use lethal force unless we are encountered with imminent threat of lethal force being used against us.
That's a weird standard though, because if it is the case that the retaliation needs to be proportional to the initial threat, how can you make that decision in the split seconds that you have to respond? Like, if someone comes at you with brass knuckles on, or better yet, just barefisted, right? And they're trying to grab you or punch you, and you shoot them in the head. The response is not proportional per se, but you don't know if the guy attacking was going to try to kill you, grab you. You don't know what his intentions were. So that is kind of a weird standard.
Section 9.32 of the Texas Penal Code specifically states, a person is justified in using deadly force against another, one, if the actor would be justified in using force against the other under Section 9.31. So in general, you have to first have the lawful ability to use some type of force, and then you must prove, two, when and to the degree the actor reasonably believes the deadly force is immediately necessary, A, to protect the actor against the other's use or attempted use of unlawful deadly force, or B, to prevent the other's imminent commission of an aggravated kidnapping, murder, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, robbery, or aggravated robbery. There are some other justifications, but they require that you are being forcibly removed against your will from your home, your car, your place of business, things such as that. So unless you are encountered with the imminent threat of unlawful deadly force being used against you, or you have one of these very serious felonies right here being committed against you, the right to use lethal force is not available under Texas law. Now, if the allegations are that the victim, Mr. Metcalf, was attempting to use unlawful lethal force against Mr. Anthony, then his response with lethal force would be justified. Whether that evidence is going to come out remains to be seen, but there has been no allegations so far to support any claim.
Well, like I said, he's apparently been sentenced, so I guess that evidence did not come out.
That nature. But you see, there are exceptions to both 9.31 and 9.32, where if these events occur, then the person is absolutely precluded from ever raising self-defense as an affirmative defense of their case. They literally forfeit the right of self-defense. And in both statutes, we find that there is an exception when the person did not provoke the person against whom the force was used. That's right. You cannot be the person who provoked the confrontation. In many states, this is called the first aggressor. In simple terms, you can't pick the fight and then later claim you were acting in self-defense. And in some states, like mine, for example, there's a jury instruction that says that if you provoke the confrontation, no matter how belligerent the response is from the other side, you cannot avail yourself of self-defense. But
that makes sense, actually. That's wild, but it makes sense at the same time. Because if you start the conflict or the confrontation even to a minor degree, and then the person responding tries to stab you or something, and you, in response, shoot them, you've started the entire situation. So I could see where that gets hairy. I don't know, that's rough.
And in Section 9.32, there are other exceptions written into when you can and cannot use deadly force. That is, are there instances in which you would forfeit the legal right to use lethal force? Yes, there is, because the statute specifically reads, a person who has the right to be present at the location where the deadly force is used, who has not provoked the person against whom the deadly force is used, and who is not engaged in criminal activity at the time the deadly force is used.
Hold on, let me understand this. A person who has a right to be present at the location where the deadly force is used, who has not provoked the person against whom the deadly force is used, and who is not engaged in criminal activity at the time the deadly force is used. And my dumb ass covered up the rest of the text with my face so I can't read it.
Not required to retreat before using deadly force as described by this section. Which means if Mr. Anthony was not permitted to be in that location or was engaged in other types of criminal activity, such as trespassing, such as making harassing threats or anything of that, then he would not be able to avail himself of self-defense, and certainly not able to avail himself of lethal force as used in self-defense.
Got it.
So this is what might be the uphill battle for the Anthony legal team, depending on how the testimony comes out. Because if a judge believes that he was the one who provoked the confrontation, that he was the first aggressor, then a jury will be given the instruction on provocation, and they will be instructed that if you believe Mr. Anthony provoked the conflict, then they will ignore the self-defense instructions. In some jurisdictions, as a matter of fact, if a jury believes that the person was in fact the first aggressor, they are literally instructed to disregard any self-defense instruction that might be in that instruction packet. But listen, even if the jury believes that Mr. Anthony was not the initial aggressor, that he did not provoke this confrontation, that he could lawfully remain in that location, then yeah, his use of force may be lawfully justified so long as the force that was used was what? That's right, proportional. And under Texas law, we only get to use lethal force if we are either in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, or we're having any one of these very serious crimes about to be committed upon our person.
So he was cooked. He was cooked. There was no way he was winning this trial, even if it sounded like if he had one leg to stand on, the other leg would have been taken out, meaning if he claims self-defense, but he's the one who started the altercation, then you throw out the self-defense angle. Or if he didn't start it, but he retaliated in self-defense, the stabbing was not proportional to the original act of the aggressor. So he was cooked either way. It was what it sounds like.
Absent a finding of that nature, this is no longer lawful self-defense. Rather, it is a murder. So for everybody out there who's watching this case, I understand everybody out there who's getting all worked up about this case. Let me give you a piece of advice. Everyone take a deep breath, let all the evidence come out, and then we can make our own minds up. But at the end of the day, the only minds that are going to really count in this, well, that's the 12 that are sitting in the box. All right, listen, the case once again is State of Texas versus Carmelo Anthony. The statutes that we referenced today out of the state of Texas are all linked up down below so that you don't have to take our word for it. You can actually geek out on it for yourself. If you got any other questions about this or anything else related to our rights of self-defense.
Shout out to Washington Gun Law. I'm a fan. I'm subscribed. I'm going to be watching more of their content. I really appreciate the objective, law-based breakdown of this case. But, yeah, it sounds like he was cooked either way. It's unfortunate, man. You know, a young man lost his life, and then another young man basically loses his life. Rough times. But I just wanted to break this down. That was interesting. I'm going to catch y'all on the next one. Peace.